This is Ben Davidson.
This is Leighton Gray.
This is Tanner Naday.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
This is Jim St. Clair. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Thursday. How's everybody doing today? Before we get on to it, let's start here. Precious metals can be thought of as the ultimate insurance policy against economic uncertainty and government incompetence, with deficit spending completely out of control and fiscal irresponsibility unlikely to end anytime soon. Now is the time to protect a portion of your hard-earned savings with a form of money that has been recognized for thousands of years. I'm talking silver and gold. I'm talking Silver Gold Bull. They are my go-to for precious metals with their complete in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, storing, or adding precious metals to your retirement accounts. They have a new feature exclusively for you that allows you to buy Royal Canadian Mint silver coins for the same price as generic silver rounds. Just text or email Grahame for down in the show notes for details. Anytime you're heading to Silver Gold Bull, make sure to reference the SNP. It helps you, it helps them, it helps me. It's a win-win-win. Did you hear Kristen McGowan got elected? So she is now, was running for school board, and she got it, Northwest School Division. So congrats to Kristen McGowan and to all the lovely people who voted for her. She is, of course, from McGowan Professional Chartered Accountants. And to find out more about her, go to McGowanCPA.ca. But congrats, Kristen, on getting elected. Substack, you can subscribe for free every Sunday night, 5 p.m. You're going to find out some interesting things about, not only are you going to get the week in review, but you're going to find some things out about me, and you might just get to see who the next speaker of the Cornerstone Forum is. This past week, we announced that Matt Ehret is going to be the next one. So the keynote speakers include Tom Luongo, Alex Kreiner, Chuck Prodnick, Kaylin Ford, Matt Ehret, and Sunday night we're announcing our next speaker. We also have guest hosts including Chris Sims last year. She was on stage with us. She's from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And Tom Bodrovics from Palisade Gold Radio. We're adding a trade show this year. We got early bird tickets are up. And May 10th at the Winsport in Calgary. Going to be a lot of fun. I got to give a shout out to Silver Gold Bull and Bow Valley Credit Union. Without those two fine companies stepping up, I don't think I'd be in Calgary. And so they found a way to convince me, and that's where we're taking the show on the road this year. I hope to see you there. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Hit the thumbs up. Hit whatever it is that says, hey, I like what you're doing. You can, on Spotify, you can give me, I don't care. You tell me. Is it a 1-star? Is it a 5-star? Leave a star. And if you can, write a review. Share it with your friends. If you're on X watching this, hit the retweet button and share away, folks. We got to break through some of these silos that they seem to want to put us in. All right, let's get on to that. Tale of the tape. He's a former Green Beret, journalist, and author. I'm talking about Michael Shaun. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Michael Shaun. So, sir, thank you for hopping on.
Thank you. And I'm in Buenos Aires, of all places, in Argentina. Been down here meeting with all kinds of interesting people. Came in from Japan, where I was doing the same thing. and as you can imagine, the wars that we're in are global. It's not, it's not just a Texas war or a Florida war or New York. It's global. And to understand the situations that are unfolding, you have to, sometimes I hone in with a microscope and spend months at a time at places like the Darien Gap, or across the entire southern U.S. border. I've done that, much of that on the Mexican side, on the American side, but other times you have to zoom out, get an orbital view, and see what is actually happening on the big board here, to understand what's likely to happen next and the strengths and weaknesses of the people that we face. So that's why I'm in Buenos Aires, because this, believe it or not, is another important area.
Well, I was wondering, Michael, you're the first time, I know people know who you are, but I would love it if you would give us, because you have, in my mind, a pretty crazy background that leads you to where you're at today. You don't need to spend a half an hour on it, but I would love if you just kind of explain a little bit of who you are to the audience up here in Canada.
Actually, it has been by the way, we were in Canada earlier this year too, all the way up in Yellowknife and Toronto, of course, and over in Vancouver, looking at these same situations. Yeah, actually Yellowknife was the first city outside, if you want to call Yellowknife a city. It's up near the Arctic Circle, right? 400 kilometers
Here in
away.
Canada, we call it a city.
Yeah, yeah. That was the first actually city outside of the United States I ever went to in my life, right? I mean, I had just finished a language school in the military in California, and I drove up with a Canadian friend. We were in the U.S. Special Forces together, but he had just gone through the language school with me, and we drove up to Canada because he's Canadian. And he's like, "Hey, I'll show you Canada. I'm going to go visit my family and stuff." So we went up there, and we were getting gas up in Calgary. So actually, that would have been the first city I saw, but we didn't see much of it because we were just with his family. We were getting gas to go back to the United States. And I said, "Hey, what's this place, Yellowknife?" And that was back when you had the big atlas and stuff, which I still have a bunch of those. I still buy them. And I said, what's this Yellowknife place? He goes, "Oh man, that's really up there." I was like, "Let's go." So we went, and it was, from Calgary to Yellowknife is, I don't know, it was 24, 36 hours. I don't know. It was a long drive. And it was mostly gravel road, And so we went up to Yellowknife, and it was unbelievable. And, so that was when I was 20, I guess. And so that was the first, real place I'd seen outside of the United States. And now I just went back there again, and Yellowknife is just filled with, actually, believe it or not, like Pakistanis, Afghans, Nigerians. It's filled with, and a lot of the natives, unfortunately, are alcoholics. This is all part of a larger war plan, but I'll talk about that later. My background is I grew up in Florida, and I was born and raised in Florida. Actually, really, often Americans wonder where people are from before that. My family, from the mother's side, came to America in 1609. They got shipwrecked on Bermuda. There's a book about this called The Sea Venture, and that shipwreck is why Bermuda today is the oldest British colony, actually. And so they were shipwrecked there for about 10 months. Then they made it to Jamestown in 1610, and they were the Easons. And since that time, my family, I have no cultural memories outside of the United States. So I was about the roughly fourth generation. I say roughly because it depends on which side of the family. Floridian, in my family line. I grew up in Winter Haven, Florida, born and raised in Winter Haven, same as my mother, and that sort of thing. And then I went off to the Army when I was 18, became one of the youngest Green Berets when I was 19. We had a very interesting way to grow up. I grew up hunting gators and doing a lot of sports, and I loved physics and those sorts of things. I always loved sciences. And so, but anyway, I ended up in Special Forces. And that's how I ended up in that language school, because I graduated from the Special Forces course when I was 19 at Fort Bragg, ended up accidentally killing somebody in a fist fight. Somebody attacked me. He had attacked other people that day, and he happened to attack me. I weighed about $145 or something, $150 if I was wet. And but I was very strong and very fast, and we got into a fight. And he had just been attacking other people, so it wasn't like But the way it played out in the newspapers, and this is important, the way it played out in the newspapers was new Green Beret goes and kills somebody with his hands. That's not what happened. What happened was this guy had been fighting other people, destroyed the kitchen where he worked. He had a tattoo that said "Death Before Dishonor." This is at Ocean City, Maryland. And then he attacked me. So, and I was I looked like I was about 14 years old. I was actually 19. So he attacked me. We ended up in a fist fight. He died on the spot. Long story short, I ended up being cleared of all the charges, and Special Forces kept me. So then they allowed me to go to that language school. And then I ended up in Yellowknife. And then I got on my first A team when I was 20 years old, 2021. Yeah.
Matthew,
20.
you mind me asking, you go from Green Beret, what is language school?
It's we have what's called DLI, Defense Language Institute. And so I don't know how many languages they teach now. It must have been, 50 or 60 back then. I don't even know. It was languages like Swahili and different sorts of Arabic, Mandarin, of course, Cantonese, long list, Spanish, German. I went for German. So I, Polish, Czech, they had just a long list, Romanian. So I went for, I put in for Spanish. I ended up in German. And so so by the time I got to Yellowknife, I spoke a little bit of German because I just got out of the school. So anyway,
and sorry, the thought being, sorry to interrupt. The thought being, if you learned a second language, if you're deployed in different places, now you have a little bit of a tool set to understand the common tongue of that area.
Right. I mean, in special forces, one of your major jobs is to go off in small teams to work with local people, right? So, for instance, I was a weapons specialist, and I learned, I don't know, in the initial course, maybe 80 weapons, small arms. And so it was, and most of the weapons that you're learning are old, actually. Most of them are like, weapons from the 40s and 50s and, that sort of thing, because the weapons of the guerrillas around the world tend to be things like AK-47s or just much older weapons, because that's just what they have. I'm sorry. And so interestingly, the only two places I've ever had allergies are here in Buenos Aires and Poland. So that's why I might sneeze or something during this time. There's these trees out here. I call them sneeze trees, but only here in Poland. And this is my 99th country, by the way. So that's quite interesting that only two places. Anyway, so I went to the weapons school and later on to engineer, which is explosives and that sort of thing. And so that my jobs in special forces were weapons and explosives, right? And so, but I had also gone to language school for German. Everybody on my team spoke some language, right? Whether it was Swedish or Czech or something. Most of them on my two A teams spoke. I was on two different A teams. Special Forces has three main types of teams: A team, B team, and C team. A teams are the teams that everybody wants to be on. Those are the teams that actually do the serious missions and that sort of thing. The B teams and the C teams support the A teams, right? So in any case, I was on two different A teams, and our missions, I can say it at the time, earlier, it would have been obviously top secret, but our missions were to parachute into Poland and to fight Soviets and near the Belarus border, actually in contested area today, as it soon will be. And so in any case, I trained to do that mission for 3 years, obviously top secret at the time. But that was why I learned to speak German when what I really needed to speak was Polish. I also went to a language school for Polish, but it was much shorter. And then after the Army, I lived in Poland for a couple of years, unrelated. So I was in the Army for 5 years. I loved Special Forces. I didn't really like the Army. I don't like the Army. I still don't like the Army, but I love Special Forces. It's like a lot of SEALs, a lot of Delta Force guys. They love their unit, but they really don't like the Navy or the Army. That's kind of the nature of the beast. You'll find a lot of those sorts are like that, I'm sure you know. And so I got out and I went to school because I, at that point, said, well, I'm going to go and become a physicist now. And I ended up being offered a job with Michael Jackson, weirdly. It just came out of the blue. Did security for him for a while. Used to do my calculus homework over at Neverland over in California. That was something else. But at some point, I discovered I'm not meant for this. I've heard the call of the wild. I've tasted the call of the wild. And I went back overseas, and I've pretty much spent most of my life, maybe 2/3 of my life have been overseas out of the United States. Although I've seen the United States extensively, I've been crisscrossed. I lived in Massachusetts and North Carolina and Georgia and Florida, of course, Ohio, California. I've been all over. I've been all over the United States, right? I've seen it like a ant trails everywhere. So I'm quite familiar with my own country, and I'm quite familiar with Europe and Asia. And I spent about 19 years in Asia and about 25 countries in Asia. So I've seen the world quite a bit, right? And I spent years in wars, right? So I would learn, as two of my friends were killed in the Iraq War. One was one of my Green Beret teammates. His name was Richard Ferguson. We called him Fergie. He was killed near Samara. His Humvee apparently rolled over. They were doing some kind of combat operation. And then another friend that I went to school with in Winter Haven, Florida, his name was Scott Helvenston. Scott was the youngest Navy SEAL, actually. We used to work out together, and we played on the same football team at Winter Haven High School. And Scott, he was a very serious young man at the time because we were teenagers. but he went off to SEAL buds and all that. And he actually made it at 17. Now, when I say that, I've said it in the past, and people say, nonsense, that's bullshit. It's absolutely true. And it would take all of like, this is the age of the internet. It would take all of like 3 minutes to, to find that it was actually true. He was an incredible stud, but he hated the Navy too. Anyway, I think Scott stayed in for 11 years, right? And then Scott something like that. And then Scott ended up working for Blackwater. And you may remember those contractors who were killed in Fallujah and hanged off the bridge. Scott was one of them. And so he was working for Blackwater. And so Scott was killed one day, I think March 30th, 2004, and Fergie was March 31st, or maybe, anyway, one was one day and one was the next. And I went to their funerals. I went to Fergie's funeral, my Green Beret teammate in Colorado. And I went, and there was a bunch of Green Berets and CIA guys there and all that stuff, the normal stuff. And they're all like, why aren't you, you're a writer, why aren't you off in the war? And I'm like, I'm not going to the war. And, because why would I go to the war? It's a war, and I'm doing all kinds of other interesting things that are incredibly interesting as well and important. And, well, not as important as the war, but in any case, I didn't realize what was happening in the war yet, but I started listening more closely to those SF guys, Special Forces guys that were telling me to get to the war. Some of them went back to the war. And then when I went to Scott's funeral in Florida, likewise, there were a bunch of Navy SEALs. I was with his mother and that sort of stuff. And the SEALs were like, why don't you go to the war? And again, I'm telling the SEALs, just like I just told the Green Berets, I'm not going to the war. And but then as the war unfolded in 2004, another one of my high school friends who also knew Scott, his name was Rodney Morris. He happened to be a lieutenant colonel in the 1st Infantry Division. And he was in Tikrit in Iraq, and Rodney kept messaging me. And this is when I discovered what Skype was. Rodney Skyped me from Iraq, and I was like, wow, this Skype thing's pretty cool, because I've been spending a lot of time in Asia and places like India. They didn't have much of that stuff. And Rodney was like, he kept messaging me all the time. You need to come over to Iraq. I'm like, why would I come to Iraq? You just told me you got in an RPG ambush last week, right? And all this stuff. But as 2004, by the way, when Scott was killed and hanged off the bridge, that's when American and British and Iraqi and other forces did a huge attack on Fallujah in April of 2004. That's when I was at Scott's funeral. They're doing this massive attack. So there were journalists from around the world at Scott's funeral, because it was all over the news. I mean, even Japan, stuff like that. I mean, they came from everywhere. It was unbelievable. And so in April of 2004, while Scott was being laid to rest and Fergie was being laid to rest, we were attacking Fallujah while I was in Colorado and Florida. And so that's when the war really picked up, was when that second attack on Fallujah. A lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people were like, go after them, get them in Fallujah. But the war then exploded, right? He did exactly threw gas on it. And so our casualties started to skyrocket. So then as we go through the year, my friend in Iraq, Rodney Morris, kept calling up, when he come into the war. And I'm like, Rodney, I love you, brother. Approximately never. I'm not coming to the war, right? Just thank you, though. Thank you for the invitation. And but then we start going into Operation Arrowhead Ripper, Phantom Fury. Arrowhead Ripper was an operation I was on years later, because I would end up in the war after I told him never. So I ended up in as we get near the end of 2004, in about October, the United States launched with the Brits and others Operation Phantom Fury. This was the second big attack on Fallujah. And at that point, I was like, wow, this war is out of control. These are not dead enders. This is a clear insurgency. Everybody's getting involved. There's people coming in from all over the world to join battle. And so I said, okay, I'll come. So I went over to the war, and I arrived in December 2004. And the war that I said I was not going to go to, because I know how I am. If there's something going on, I will get in the middle of it. So it's like a safety mechanism. I'm not going, right? And so because I know once I get close, Duke's up, I'm going to jump in, right? And so that's exactly what happened. So I showed up in December of 2004. There was a lot of firefights going on. I was in Baghdad. There was tracers flying in the night, bombings, literally like jets dropping bombs flashes of light, the big boom, booms, just lots of firefights. And I was like, wow, this is even worse than CNN makes it out. And so I said, well, what's the unit in the most combat? And next thing you know, months later, by April or May, Bruce Willis was reaching out wanting to play me in a movie because I was just going combat. And I was actually with Eric Kurilla, who's the current CENTCOM commander. I was actually photographing him when he got shot right in front of me several times. He got shot 3 times, and it was right in front of me. And that was just normal. I mean, I was doing this all the time. Occasionally, I'd catch it on photos or videos and that sort of thing. Eric kept fighting. He was an incredible commander. Unfortunately, he's gone woke, but he was absolutely an incredible combat leader, very smart, very courageous, and the CENTCOM leader now and very woke. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so I then left Iraq for a while, went over to Afghanistan, and I started going back and forth, Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I would just go to the units in the most combat. And so I did 2 years in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. So 4 years total between 2004 and 2011 or 12. I think I left Afghanistan when I realized I was like, this war is lost. I'm getting in so many firefights, so many bombings, so many incoming rockets and stuff. For what? We're just going to lose the war? I'm out, right? So I punched out and I went and covered, I covered 2 coups in Iraq. One was in 2010, so while the war was still on, and then I went back to Afghanistan. But anyway, I started covering other conflicts, right? Like I was in 2 of the coups in Thailand, and I mean, like this close. I wasn't like watching them from Chiang Mai. I was right there where they were happening. And so I was covering a lot of other conflicts and that sort of thing. But as time went on, my track record for predicting these things just kept getting better and better and better. And now I've reached the point where I strongly trust my own judgment much more than all these analysts because I see what I predict, for instance, with the Ukraine war, which is unfolding right now. Just rewind the tapes to all the things that I was saying before the first shots were fired. And look what's happening in the last 8 hours. And you'll see amazing accuracy. Or likewise, a lot of these old.
When you talk Ukraine, Russia right now, speaking to missiles hitting into Russia, and please fill in the blanks that I'm going to for surely I'm doing the, I don't know, the 10,000 foot view. Like obviously the big news here in the last couple of days, I think, has been the fact that Biden okaying the use of rockets into Russia, which has happened, and then Putin basically outlining how a few missiles and he can take out a good chunk of the world. And I don't know, Michael, you fill in the blanks there.
Let me see if I've had any updates from you, and I have right here. Okay, here's an intel guy saying Houthi struck Turkish bulk carrier, the bulk carrier Anadolu, whatever it's called, and Anadolu. Anyway, Turkey was reportedly carrying cargo destined for Israel. Spain is closing embassy in Kiev. So we just got message a couple hours ago. Dozens of embassies in Kiev are telling their people to prepare for a major attack. Embassies closing, many embassies closing in Kiev, and actually many of the staff have been told to go to subway shelters for shelter. So listen, if you want to be accurate on predicting wars, there's just a couple of things you have to keep in mind, and you'll be so accurate, you'll look like Nostradamus. Just say when the next war comes, if there is a next war after this one, if there is, it might be like Einstein said, with sticks and stones. But when there is a war, just predict these 2 things. You'll be amazingly accurate. Say, this war is going to grow. And then say, it's going to grow out of control, unpredictably, right? And it's going to grow beyond what it's just going to grow. And you'll always be right. It's amazing. People are like, you're so right on these wars. I'm like, well, look at what I keep predicting, the same things over and over and over. The war will grow. It will grow unpredictably because that's what wars do, right? It's like a fire in a dry forest with the erratic winds. Which way will it go? I don't know, but I can tell you one thing, it's going to grow, and it's going to grow unpredictably, right? And that's what happens. Now it's growing unpredictably. These wars almost always last longer than they are expected. And I'm not talking little battles with Grenada or the invasion of Panama or something like that. Those are just battles. I'm talking about actual serious wars. They grow unpredictably, they last longer than expected, and nobody controls them. Nobody is in control of this war. Russia's not in control. We're not in control. Nobody is in control. The war now is a living, breathing being. It is in control of itself, right? And so it has a life of its own. And that's the danger here, right? So we can have somebody can launch a missile right now. It might be in the air right now, or 100 missiles, and Russia says that's it. Hydrogen bombs out, right? And that's it. Next thing you know, Ukraine and Europe and the United States and Israel all get hit with hydrogen bombs, right? UK gets hit with the tsunami that Russia's been promising, and they can make those things. The United States practiced making tsunamis generations ago with hydrogen bombs. You can make tsunamis with hydrogen bombs, right? And the Russians say they can make a tsunami that will wipe out all of the British islands, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, gone, right? And I think they could probably do it. And they keep promising that they will if these things keep going. So if you only predict those things, you'll be amazingly accurate. But there's other things that are off the beaten path that I keep getting right. With Misako Ganaha, who I'm with somewhere, and she's running off to a meeting now in Buenos Aires. For instance, we predicted the Nord Stream attack. We went to Germany twice in advance. We went to BASF. That's a German chemical company in Germany, because we thought if you pay attention to what the enemy is saying, or this amalgam of oligarchs is the enemy, the enemy is saying they want to deindustrialize, and I'm not talking about the Russians. I'm talking about World Economic Forum and those sorts, right? They want to deindustrialize Europe, right? They want to reduce the global population, right? So, and I believe them because I've been watching them very closely, and that is exactly what they're doing. They're removing water infrastructure around Europe, like dams and the United States, and dikes and that sort of thing. Levees. They are reducing water infrastructure in ways that people don't even realize it, and they're not going to realize it until they have some really bad weather, right? And so if I were going to deindustrialize Europe, what would I do? Now, when you go through special forces sabotage training, which I did, and you will learn how to do things like make a Carver matrix. A Carver matrix is a planning tool for target selections, right? So you've got all these potential targets. You've got thousands and thousands of potential targets. Should you hit that little power line over there? No, it's a waste of time. Should you hit that power station? Maybe. Or should you hit that power station over there? Maybe that one's better. I don't know. So you have this thing called the Carver matrix, right? And the Carver matrix is a criticality, accessibility, recuperability, effect. And anyway, bottom line is just look up Carver matrix online and you'll see what I'm talking about. But it's an old planning tool that was designed by and for CIA special forces after World War II for teams who would do things like parachute into Poland and go on sabotage campaigns, right? And so when I'm looking at Europe using that old training I had, and I imagine to myself, let's say what capabilities I have. I'm a globalist with billionaire amalgamated billionaires, many billionaires who have access to everything, right? Because they actually own the ports and that sort of thing. So what would I do if I were going to deindustrialize Europe and put us into famines? What would I do in my Carver matrix? So I made a Carver matrix and I started listing targets. And number 1 and number 2 were Nord Stream and Groningen gas field in Netherlands. Nord Stream, of course, is that Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines from Russia to Germany, and they feed BASF and other things. BASF is you need that natural gas to make nitrogenous fertilizers, by the way. You need the hydrogen. The hydrogen on the natural gas is you combine that with the nitrogen in the air and make ammonia, like ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, urea, and those sorts of things. And that's called the Haber-Bosch process. It was designed by 2 German chemists, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch, and that they started making those nitrogenous fertilizers at BASF in 1914, right? The same year the Panama Canal opened, 1914, right? So basically about 100 years ago. And so they started there at BASF, the plant that Misako and I went to twice in advance, warning, publishing, saying on interviews, I think they're going to do something to Nord Stream. And the last time we went to BASF, that's the birthplace of nitrogenous fertilizer production, was September, I think, 12th, 2022, 14 days before somebody blew up Nord Stream. 14 days. We were there 14 days in advance. Again, that was our second trip. Warning, I think somebody's going to take out Nord Stream. And then, I had an extra iPad that I just watched. There was a website where you could watch how many cubic meters per second were flying through those pipelines, right? They're going through at a high rate of speed. And suddenly all those readings went to 0 cubic meters per second. And then I said, let's restart this thing. Restarted it, started making some calls, look on the TV, there's bubbles coming from the north, coming from the sea, right? From the Baltic. There's actually bubbles coming. I was like, well, something just happened in Nord Stream. Everything's at 0 and there's bubbles coming up. And everybody's reporting that the flows have stopped, right? So they did it. That's a huge hit. Cut. Now, Groningen. I went over to Groningen gas field in Netherlands. Groningen is the biggest gas field in Europe, right? And I was on the Jordan Peterson show with Eva Vlardingerbroek and saying, I think they're going to stop Groningen. And people are like, that's crazy. They're never going to stop it. There's people demanding that it be closed, but they're never going to stop it because it's the biggest gas field in Europe. And I'm like, McFly, exactly. Carver matrix, number 1, Nord Stream. I predicted it many times. Bam, it's gone. Number 2 would be Nord Stream gone. Number 2, Groningen. Groningen is now closed. It is closed. And it is now closed. Not only did they close it, they didn't just turn off the spigots. They filled them full of concrete. They filled the infrastructure up. They destroyed it. It's destroyed. They're not going to restart it. You're not going to just have a new government in Netherlands and they're just going to open it right back up again. It's done, right? This is unbelievable. So you're watching the de-industrial. It is believable. I say unbelievable insofar as I'm not surprised. I predicted it in writing many times and on interviews like this, because clearly they're de-industrializing Europe. Clearly they're pushing us into this war in Ukraine. It's clear that some on our side want to make a nuclear war. Why would they want to make a nuclear war? They have nice bunkers, apparently, and probably down here south of the equator where I'm at now. The bottom line is many things like this, not just those two absolutely major and what people thought were unlikely events, 1 and 2, they happened, right? How did I get those right? Because I study 7 days a week. Or you can look up in an old article called Michael Yon's Predictions Deemed Prophetic. And that dealt with something in the Afghan war. And I made these 4 or 5 predictions that were way off of line, that none of them should have happened. And all of them happened in sequence, as I said, right? How did I get those right? How do I keep doing this? Because I study 7 days a week and I don't allow myself into groupthink. If the group all thinks one thing, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. I don't know, but I'm going to make up my own mind, right?
So, Michael, where we sit today then, however many days from Donald Trump being inaugurated, we sit.
Well, and this is what causes many of my readers to abandon me. My readership used to be this big. Now it's like this big because I keep saying things that I think to be true, like don't take the jab, right? Readership shrank. It's like, don't take it. Don't take the jab. It's a weapon. It's not a vaccine. Stop calling it a vaccine. And when I would say things like this, people would say things like, we shouldn't be going to war with Iran, and they would say, oh, you're an anti-Semite. Okay, listen, Polish guy, don't tell me about being anti-Semite. And secondly, who are the people that told all the Jews in Israel to take the jab? Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, Netanyahu, they're all telling Jews all over the world to take the jab. And I'm telling millions, don't take the jab. And they call me the anti-Jew. Okay. I'm the one that said, don't take it, brother.
You had, I can't remember where I grabbed this from, but whether it was an interview or something I read of yours, I can't remember. Anyways, you had wrote, I think, if a writer wants to make money, he should avoid truth and tell people what they want to hear. Yet to win the war, tell the truth. So yeah, I wrote that down like that. That's That's really, well, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. And you know what? In 2000, when did I write that? Maybe 2006 or 7 or something, maybe 7-ish. Because what happened is I went over to Iraq, or I was in Iraq. Then I left, Eric got shot and all that. And I went over to Afghanistan because at that point I had not been to Afghanistan yet. So I went to Afghanistan thinking, wow, I want to go see a war that we're winning, right? In 2006. That's what I thought. I hadn't been there yet. So then I ran all over the place without U.S. or British forces on my first trip. I went down there with one of my old special forces friends, actually, and who's still a close friend. I just talked with him on the phone the other day. But we went over to Afghanistan together, and because he built some of the runways and that sort of thing over there, right? And so I realized, I was like, wait a minute, this is 2006. This is supposed to be the war that we won. And it's clear that we're not actually. But then the narrative was that we were winning in Afghanistan or had won, and now we're just kind of building up Afghanistan into Dubai or something, and that we're losing Iraq. And we were losing Iraq at that time, but we were actually making some progress on some things. Anyway, not to go into that. But the bottom line is I wrote 12 major dispatches in 2006. And that was when I was like, yep, I'm going to lose a lot of support and readers on this one because it's very clear that we're losing in Afghanistan. But I'm just going to say, this is what I think. Look, do you want an oncologist that comes and says you don't have cancer because you don't want to hear you have cancer? No, you want an oncologist who comes and says, this is what I think you have. I've been doing this for all these years, and I think this is it. I've treated so many patients, and this is what we should do right now, right? You know what I mean? And that was what I did with Afghanistan. And that was when I wrote those words because I was signaling, let me tell you, let me finish this. This is important.
Sure.
So I was like, this is going to cause people to not pay attention to me, but I'm going to tell the truth. And those who stick with me will see that it'll probably turn out to be true. I don't know, of course, at the time it did turn out to be accurate, but that was when I wrote, if you want to make money, you tell people what they want to hear, right? And if you want to win the war, you tell the truth, right? Now, later, these mill blogs, I call them mill kooks, which really upset them badly. They started only quoting that first sentence. If you want to make money, you tell people what they want to hear. And they chopped off that next sentence, or it may have been just after the comma. I don't remember if it had a period or it was just a comma. But those sentences, those words were right together, right? They cut off that next part. Those were the mill bloggers working for the Pentagon. The mill kooks like Black 5 and Bill Roggio and the rest of those clowns, right? And so the bottom line is I ended up being accurate, right? Now, so I started telling people that, and then I went back to Iraq, and you could see in 2007 that the war started going in our favor again. And I think I was on the Hugh Hewitt show, and I said something like, I think the war is starting to change. And I think that was about August of 2007. I was in Operation Arrowhead Ripper, and I think it was starting to go in our favor. And then again, people went crazy, and they're like, hey, this is the worst month of the entire war, was, I think, August of 2007. You can look on iCasualties.org, iCasualties.org, if it's still up. And you can see, I think August of 2007 was the most casualties in 1 month in the entire war. And there I am by satellite phone doing interviews saying, I think the war's going in our favor. And they're like, fool, don't you know that this is the worst month of the war? And I'm like, yeah, you hear those gunshots in the background? That's a real firefight, right? I get it. I'm in it. But we're whipping their asses, right? We're starting to smash them back. We're taking a lot more casualties because we're doing the surge. But one of the things and one of the indicators of why I thought we were starting to do better in Iraq was exactly why I thought we were doing worse in Afghanistan was human intelligence. When you start getting more human that's actionable and accurate, that's a good sign. That's like your blood pressure is doing good. But if you're getting less human, it's like your blood pressure is going down. In other words, if people are not like FBI intelligence would know this right now. Are you getting more human or less human from people that's actionable, right? Are people giving you more accurate information or less than they did 10 years ago, right? If they're giving you a lot less, that tells you you're losing, right? Because you're losing the population. In Iraq in 2007, I was starting to watch people come up to us because I was doing so much actual combat. I was starting to watch I would watch people come up and give us act like the Al Qaeda. They're in that building right over there. How many? 4. What weapons do they have? They have those rifles and RPGs. And where are they at? That building. I'm put my laser on it. That one. Yes, that one. Right there. Right. And we would go kill them or capture them or whatever. Right. And this is the thing. We had them on the run because people were telling us where they were. And if people are telling you where they are, we're going to smoke them. Right. And so we were taking a lot of casualties because we were attacking. We had more troops in combat, but we were inside of their OODA loop. We were inside the enemy OODA loop. We were inside their replenishment cycle. We were diminishing them every day. And then you see, after August of 2007, the casualties, I called it right at the peak of the death market, if you want to call it that. Right at the peak is when I started saying, I think we're starting to win. I'm not sure, but that's what I think. And then the casualties went down, and they went down dramatically. And then we left Iraq and gave it to ISIS. And so there you go. You can't make up this stuff. So, but the bottom line is you have to be on the ground, and you have to know what you're looking at. You have to know which questions to ask and what's important and what to just throw out, right? And you have to know, you have to be able to think for yourself, not thinking what the intel people tell you, unless they're very reliable intel people. There are some that are quite good. There are some military officers that are incredibly good, but most of them, even the military officers, most of them, I'm like, okay, whatever. They might be interesting for some specific information, but when it comes to analysis, many of them are just as useless as some random guy on the street. And so that's why, there's not a lot of people that can do this at a high level.
So, Michael, if you fast forward, though, to today, like you take all your accolades and staring at the problems and seeing in the tea leaves where things are heading, and, you go, well, the war is going to grow and it's going to change in unpredictable ways. But but as you talk longer, you're actually way more precise than that. You're actually staring at different things. I hear, like, when you talk the Darien Gap, you talk of weaponized migration, you see all these different arteries they're starting to get rid of for Europe and on and on.
Yep.
I can't read it.
Weapons of mass migration. That's right.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess I go, okay, come and sit with me here right now, staring at the world we got going on, where like World War III feels like it's already been going on for some time.
We're in it.
So I don't know, like, where is this heading, or what are you seeing that you want people to know about? To me, I guess, let's talk about right this instant, in this moment in time, and where we're heading.
It's clear, it's crystal clear that substantial enemies are trying to reduce the population of the entire globe, right? Now, these are oligarchical structures. It's not just one guy sitting on a throne, Wizard of Oz style, right? It's groups, oligarchical structures. You got the CCP, you got the Russians, you got various people in West, you got the Zionists, and the Zionists are not monolithic either. There are Zionist Jews, there are Zionist Christians, there are Zionist atheists, and there are Zionists who clearly want to keep the borders open to the United States and Europe, and there are Zionists who clearly want to close the borders, at least to the United States. For instance, I took 2 Zionists down to the Darien Gap, Brett Weinstein and Laura Loomer. They clearly want to close the U.S. border. They're straight up Zionists. They'll tell you that all day long. Get them on your show, they'll tell you that. But they want to close the border, right? And Brett's the atheist, and I think Laura's actually Jewish, right? And Brett's Jewish, but whatever. Zionist does not mean Jew, right? Zionist is a political party, right? But they try to confuse us with that. But the bottom line is, these oligarchical structures are complex. So it's not like it's just people wearing this color jersey and that color jersey. There's people that change jerseys. There's people that just are like chameleons, of course. This is the normal thing, the normal human thing. What's going to happen? What's going to happen is, I think we're going into global famines. Doesn't mean everybody in the world is going to starve to death, but this is how Masako and I predicted things like, for instance, Nord Stream getting cut, Groningen being cut, or screwworms from Panama suddenly. We predicted those like 3.5 years ago or so, maybe 3 years ago, that screwworms would start to make a comeback. This is a flesh-eating worm that destroys a lot of cattle and other livestock like sheep, kills people even. This is a screwworm that we have stopped in the Darien Gap. The USDA stopped it a couple generations ago, and we irradiate billions of flies, drop them out by airplanes and other means. and because the female flies that make the screwworm larva, they only mate once. If they mate with an irradiated male, they don't produce any offspring. But the bottom line is these flesh-eating flies used to be, or these flies used to be all over the big parts of the United States, and it would cost us billions of dollars in cattle and other. So the USDA, others fought these down out of the United States, down through Mexico, down through Central America, and the front line is the Darien Gap, right? So we have a USDA program down there. I got on the trail of this. An intel guy in Panama told me about 3 years ago that the Darien is also important as a front line against these flies. And that was when I immediately thought, these flies will probably end up making it back. He didn't see the paradigm the way I see it, so I reached out immediately to the USDA asking to tour their facility. They would not let me do it. And the nature of their responses to me is like they're in the cover-up mode because, I deal with governments all the time. And you can sense when somebody's covering up. Now we got screwworms coming back. They're all over Central America now. They're coming back into the United States now. So this was like predicting that this book is going to hit the table. If I drop it, it hit the table, right? Because we know what they're doing. Some of these globalists are trying to put us into famine and reintroducing screwworms into the United States and through all these other places would be another additive pressure. The screwworms won't do it alone. The fires of the chicken farms and all these food processing facilities won't do it alone. Cutting down Nord Stream and Groningen won't do it alone, but you're setting conditions, right? You're setting conditions. You're weakening us. You're making us less resilient by taking down this water infrastructure. Now, Darien Gap. As soon as Biden was installed, Masako and Chuck Holton and I, we were in Washington, D.C. We flew down to El Paso, Texas. From D.C. we were there for the inauguration, flew to El Paso because we thought the border would start being flooded with invaders. Speaking of which, we must use accurate words. If words are atomic structures of truth and lies, you have to pick right words. If you call the thing a vaccine, all else that follows is false. It is a weapon, right? It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's a WMD, right? Likewise, migration, it's not migration. It is a weapon of mass migration, right? It's invasion. When migration, quote unquote, is used as a weapon, it's actually called invasion, right? And these have been done through long before any of us were born, long before anybody who had a printing press was born. I mean, this stuff goes back biblically, right? So, the bottom line is Darien Gap. I thought, we left El Paso, went to Colombia. That's the beginning of the Darien Gap. And then it goes through Panama. And we went to Colombia, went into the Darien Gap on that side. It's very dangerous. And then flew up to the Panama side where it's dangerous, but not as dangerous as the Colombia side. And I've spent about 6 months down in Panama since that time, since Biden was installed, down in the Darien Gap in the jungle and out in other parts of Panama, looking at other parts of this problem, because the Panama Canal is also part of this. But bottom line is, once you have these famines, all these routes that have been opened up, like through Morocco into Spain and Ceuta and Melilla and all these things, I've been over in Morocco looking at. Once these famines start, they create what's called HOP, human osmotic pressure. Human osmotic pressure is the push and pull of migration. There are some things which cause intense HOP. Those are war, pandemic, and famine, which all go together. If you get a big war, you'll always get famine and pandemic if it's a big war. I'm not talking about, invading Grenada. That's just a battle, right? And if you get a big war there, you're going to get famine, and you're going to get typhus and that sort of thing, epidemic typhus, not marine typhus, not. But anyway, the bottom line is clearly our enemies are trying to create famine, and clearly we're also going into wars. And so that, coupled with the Darien Gap being open, the northern Canada border, which is the biggest land border on earth, we've been up there this year as well. That's wide open, both coming and going. The Bermuda, people come in from Bermuda to Florida every day. There's all these other borders people don't know about. And our government is flying people in from Colombia, from Guatemala. Also, a lot of Chinese and whatnot will just go on vacation in Mexico and then go from Mexico. Many skip the Darien Gap, like Cubans will tend to go through directly to Nicaragua now. In the past, they would go through the Darien. Some still do. But mostly the Cubans fly to Nicaragua now, or Mexico first, especially Nicaragua. And then they come up through there. And so, but the bottom line is there's all these different arterial and smaller routes that people are coming through. When you get these famines, that huge human osmotic pressure, we're already overwhelmed. Like Ireland is gone. In my view, Canada is already gone. And I think that's pretty obvious for those who've been to Canada recently.
What do you mean? What do you, forgive me, just hold on that thought for a second. When you say Canada's gone, what do you mean?
For instance, if you fly up to Toronto and go to Brampton, it's basically India, right? I mean, earlier this year, we went up to a big Hindu temple in Brampton. And I spent about a year in India, by the way, and another year in Nepal and all that whole area, right? So I'm quite familiar with it. And so I went into that big Hindu temple in Brampton and then walked about 15 minutes down the road to the big Sikh temple. Hindus and the Sikhs are fighting it out over there. It's a huge population. There's no Canadians that live in this one neighborhood. I think there's one, maybe there's one there because we went to visit him, but the whole neighborhood's gone. And so, I mean, so it's been, and as you land at the airport in Toronto, as we did, there was a big welcoming center for Ukrainians, right? It was just a whole center there in the airport for Ukrainians. It's just then from Toronto, we flew up to Yellowknife, which again is 250 miles from the Arctic Circle. And it was filled with Afghans and Pakistanis and Nigerians and Somalis. This is 250 miles from the Arctic Circle, right? And so then we flew down to Vancouver. And of course, Vancouver, go to Chinatown there. Misako and I are always going around the world counting claws on the dragons, right? These Chinese dragons that you see everywhere. If it has 3 claws, it means you're a friend. If it has 4 claws, it means you're a relative, like a cousin or whatever. If the dragon has 5 claws, like there's a Chinatown about 10 minutes from me here in Buenos Aires, they all have 3 claws. That means they're just like, you're our friend. But the ones in Chinatown at Vancouver, they all have 5 claws. The 5 claws means we're claiming this land. That's what it means. That's like gangster symbols. The other Chinese know exactly what that means. But the Canadians and Americans are like, they got no idea. China is claiming that land. Every dragon that we saw in that area had 5 claws, right? So what I'm getting to is it's clear that China is taking Canada and India is vying for it. I think within the next 1 or 2 generations, you're going to see open conflict in Canada, former Canada, between India and China. I think you'll see those 2 fighting up there, among others. Not just those 2, but those 2 for sure. Because, some fish just don't mix well in the same aquarium. If you take Turks and Kurds and you put them in Berlin, or you put them in Nashville, or you put them in Miami, Turks and Kurds will fight. Kurds and Arabs will fight, right? So Kurds and Kurds will fight. And so the bottom line is some fish don't mix well in the same aquarium. And the Indians and the Chinese, they just don't mix. I spent a lot of time in China. I spent a lot of time in India. And I'm telling you, they're going to go heads up. They're going to fight. They're going to brush the Canadians out of the way. The Canadians no longer matter. They don't have the testosterone anymore. They don't have the will to survive. So they're going to die. It's that simple. Let's just cut through the bullshit and get down to it. So we have these globalists that are putting us into global famines, slowly but surely setting conditions for this while opening up these major routes like Darien, right? And so now, when Trump gets into office, he can easily close Darien. There's the border can be closed. The border can be closed. Those men and women who say the border can't be closed, slam the door on them. We don't have time for them. It can be closed. It's been closed before. It can be closed again. The Darien Gap, for instance, was closed during COVID. The Panamanians closed it like a water spigot. Not a drop was getting through for over a year, right? It's easy to close the Darien. It's easy to close Mexico through various mechanisms. One is take our military that's running around all over the world and put them right on that border, right? And people are like, what are you going to do if they keep coming? Shoot them. Shoot them. It's time to man up, right? You tell the men, you put a spotlight right in their eyes and say, go back, go back, go back, right? And if they don't go back, hey, go back, bam, that's it. You only have to do it to a few. It's time to defend our country. We're going into wars. We're already in wars. They're worsening. It's time to be like our grandfathers, right? And defend our own country. It's time to do mass deportations. This is not a video game. These people, we don't even know how many are in the United States now. When I'm in the Darien Gap, I've been across the entire southern border, by the way. I don't just go, some people go down to the border and take some photos in Arizona or whatever. I've been from SpaceX, that's one end of the border, down there on the Mexico border, on the Gulf of Mexico, where the Rio Grande dumps out. I've been there, I don't know, 50 times probably. I mean, a lot. I would say 50 times, right? I've been there a lot, all the way across to San Diego. I've been across that entire border. I spent months down there, and a lot of that on the Mexican side. I'm familiar with what that border is. It can be shut. It doesn't mean everybody's going to be stopped. Some leakers will get through. But when you start playing man games, they'll stop coming. When you start treating this as men would treat it, it will not happen, right? Likewise with the Canadian border. The Canadian border is wide open. It does not even exist, right? And it's over 4,000 miles of border up there. It's totally a naked border. Food. These food problems are coming. There's no question about it. You see farmland being bought, and they're putting solar panels on them. They're putting windmills on them. They're doing this in Netherlands, Germany, United States, everywhere. It's time to stop foreigners buying our farmland, right? It's time to stop all this stuff. It's time to get rid of the USDA. How many people does the USDA even employ? Make them all farmers. Get rid of them. We don't need the USDA. We don't need them at all. Get rid of them. It's time to not make another government organization to reduce government organizations. That's another kayfabe. That's another joke. Just start cutting them, right? Cut the U.S. government by double digits, and I mean like double digits, approximating 90%. Cut it. And we don't. All we need is to defend our borders and have a more responsible Department of State. That I see these ambassadors in places like Thailand, and like Christy Kinney. She's gone now. I helped get her out of Thailand when I was at an office there. We have these ambassadors that go over to places like Japan, and they embarrass us, and it's obviously intentional, right? They obviously go to these countries to diminish our stature with places like India. They obviously do this. We need to cut all these people. We don't need them. We don't need these giant embassies that are being built in places like the Bahamas. By the way, China has a port in the Bahamas right off the Florida coast. The United States is building a huge embassy in Bahamas, and China is too. Why are we allowing this? The Monroe Doctrine no longer exists. Earlier this year, I was in El Salvador. The Chinese built a 7th-floor library there, and it's got the Chinese Communist Party flag flying right out in front of it. Right? They built it. China Aid built it. So we went into that library. We spent half a day in there. Masako and I. There's a restaurant on the top floor. We ate dinner there, and it's just a big brainwashing center there in El Salvador. They're taking these step by step, strangling us all around us. Chinese are just one of many. We got Americans saying, hey, let's go fight Russia. They're not paying attention to what's going on. Russia is close allies with Venezuela, right? Venezuela has just dumped, I don't know how many Venezuelans have come to America. It seems like I've met half of them coming through the Darien Gap. Russia, China, Iran all have close relationships with Venezuela. They are helping Venezuela with drone and missile technology. You've seen what the Houthis have done, right? The Houthis just attacked another ship just before you and I were about to go online. They just literally attacked another ship. That's the Houthis, the guys in sandals closing major sea routes. That doesn't even include the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese down there in Venezuela, right on our doorstep, within airstrike distance from us, much less missiles. Many Americans are cheering, let's go help Israel while we don't have a border, right? They want to increase the war there with Iran while we don't have a border, right? This is unbelievable destruction of the United States. And not to mention, the biggest weapon, to my knowledge, that's been unfurled so far is information war. That's intense. But the second biggest is the death jab, right? How many Americans watching this took the death jab? We don't know what that's going to do to you. We don't know what it's going to do to those of us who didn't take it. And it's not like, hey, well, they took it and I didn't. Everything's going to be fine. No, our army took it. Our military took it. The young people took it. What's it going to do to their fertility? What's it going to do to their children when they have children? Listen, there was a drug years ago. It was a synthetic estrogen, right? It took 40 years to discover, 40, not 4, not 14. It took 40 years to discover that the women who took that fertility drug, their unborn daughters were getting cervical cancer. Their daughters who were not born were getting cervical cancer as they came of age, right? It took 40 years. We have no idea what these death jabs have just done. We have no idea. I've been over in Japan quite a lot with Masako Ganaha and a Japanese doctor called Dr. Yasufumi Murakami. They've got these other facilities where they're making these replicants, these replicant vaccines, these death jabs, which when other people take them, they spread to us, right? We don't even have to take them. They can get other people to take them, and they're jabbing people with these now. They just threatened to sue Masako last month. They threatened to sue Dr. Murakami last month because they've been, and I've been over in Japan warning about these other vaccine, quote unquote, they're weapons, obviously, right? So they're not done. It's not like we gave the jab and, okay, that's done. You're on to us. No. This is an ongoing war, right? They're still attacking the food supply. Our borders are still wide open. We've still got people saying that we're going to dedicate our military to defend Israel while we don't have a border, right? This is quite serious.
That was a lot. And the only thing
there's some specifics.
No, and I appreciate it. The only thing I'm going to humbly disagree on you and fire at me because, Michael, you've been staring at a lot of different problems, is I don't think Canada's gone. I mean, during COVID, I saw it for myself firsthand, the numbers come together for the Freedom Convoy and the different people begin to stand up. We may be slow in doing that, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, you've been all over the world. Certainly, you can walk around Alberta or anywhere in Canada and see the demographic changing right in front of our eyes as the amount of immigration continues or had been picking up steam. Certainly, you can see that. That's very noticeable. I will agree with you 100% on that. But I don't know. To me, just to wipe it off and say Canada's gone, I don't know if I agree with that.
I'm doing triage here, right? You know, when you get into war and all these guys are injured,
Sure.
and I mean, this is what I'm seeing. I spoke with 2 Canadian military officers in the last week. One is a senior officer, and the one is mid-range, right? And both of them are like, listen, your military was training with the Chinese, with the People's Liberation Army in Canada. I know you know that, right?
Yes.
And at some point, once you lose a certain critical mass, you've lost the initiative, right? There's enough political clout and monetary clout and other forms of clout in Canada now that the door is now open for other Chinese and other Indians to come in. They have that clout. If you go to Vancouver, if you go to Chinatown right now, there's a police station there. It's right. Masako and I walked into it. We talked with them, right? And it's got the Vancouver police emblem up there, you know, but it's a Chinese.
Well, I can add to this. That isn't the only one. There's Chinese police stations out in Ontario as well. You got 11 MPs right now active in our current government that have ties to CCP, and they won't release it, and it's a giant scandal. You have tons of things going on. You had the Chinese military training in winter conditions with Canadians on Canadian soil. It goes on and on. I firmly understand exactly what you're saying. That how bad of a situation Canada is, but I go, if Canadians were to give up, I think that is worse for the United States. The United States needs Canada to pull its bootstraps up and get going here, because what you're talking about, if you lose the largest border in the planet, that's not going to bode well for you. You worry about the Darien Gap. You lose the Canadian border, all bets are off.
I totally get it. That's why I was in Canada earlier this year. Totally get it. That border is absolutely naked for starters. And also it is like more than 4,000 miles. China can land 1 million troops there. And those aren't people with ties to the CCP. You have CCP people in your government, as do we, right? They're not people with ties to CCP. They're people with ties to your government. I mean, that's the Chinese Communist Party. You have a Confucius. Listen, there was a Chinese program called the Confucius Institutes, right? They are partially run by Confucius Institutes by MSS and United Front and all those guys, right? MSS, the Ministry of State Security, that's the Chinese CIA. That's who's running those police stations, them and the United Front. These are Chinese intelligence, right? Running those police stations. Masako and I went to that police station in Chinatown up in Vancouver. We went to one over in Dublin, Ireland. We went to one in London. The one in London was more surreptitious. The one in Ireland was a little bit in the open, but the one in Vancouver, right there in front of you, plate glass windows, you know, the signs up there, you can walk right in. They'll give you these cigarette holders. It was right next to the drug addicts down there, not far from where the Canadian government is handing out hard drugs to actually, and we went in there too, and they kicked us out. The bottom line is I think Canada's lost the critical mass. I'm looking at this as a cold. I'm looking at this. I have to look at this the way I look at war, which is the way a commander should look at it. What is the reality? Not what I want to be. I don't want Canada to be gone. I don't want the United States to be gone, obviously, because if Canada's gone, that's it. Obviously China can land everything up there. What are we really going to do, right? What are you really going to do when they do that in Mexico? Because they are doing it in Mexico. They're buying land right next to it. There's lithium right next to it. This goes on and on and on. These routes through Texas and whatnot. The governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, clearly as World Economic Forum. I warned about him many, many times before he was elected. My conservative friends, I'm in Texas all the time. They're warning me, who do you want? Beto to be the governor? I'm like, obviously not. But that doesn't mean that Abbott is your man. But they're like, yeah, but we have a choice, red pill or blue pill. And I'm like, don't take a pill from somebody you don't know. You know who's offering you those pills? World Economic Forum. Why would you take one of the pills? Don't support either one of them. Support somebody else. They're like, and the same, it comes with Trump. Who do you want? Kamala or the guy who pushed the jab? And they'll say, he didn't push the jab. He got fooled by Fauci. Okay. Why would I vote for an idiot who got fooled by Fauci when I and millions of others did not get fooled by Fauci? Why? Trump is a Zionist. He's open about it, right? Exactly. He's completely open about it. But people keep falling for red pill, blue pill, right? They keep falling for it. Speaking of which, I just spoke at the G. Edward Griffin red pill expo on Sunday. Because I'm constantly telling people you should read the book Creature from Jekyll Island. That's an incredible book. Everybody should read The Creature from Jekyll Island if you haven't read it. So he asked me to speak, and I did on Sunday. But the bottom line is, when somebody offers you a red pill or a blue pill, especially somebody you don't even know, you probably shouldn't take either pill, and certainly don't take both of them. Do something else. This is a false choice, but the masses of people will fall for it. That's why here in Buenos Aires they had a cannabis symposium or expo 3 weeks ago. We went to it. There's people with babies on their shoulders, people smoking dope there, and people are like, when I say this is a weapon, the children will, who may be in men's bodies, they'll say, no, this is about freedom. People should have freedom to put whatever they want into their bodies. And I get it. I totally get it. Trust me. I'm all about freedom. I'm also all about war. War is what I do. War is what I study. War is what I go look at all around the world. And one of those weapons is drugs and alcohol and prescription drugs and death jabs, right? These are all part of the very comprehensive war plan: food, migration routes.
Michael, what do you make of El Salvador? I had on Dr. Jack Cruz a couple episodes ago, and I've been following Bukele there over the 6-8 months. I don't know what the time frame is. It seems very unusual in today's world. What do you see out of El Salvador?
I went down there and I took a look, and I would actually advise it to take a vacation. I was surprised. I mean, it was really, because, it used to be one of the most dangerous places on earth.
Yeah.
And now I would say not only go on vacation, but actually you could take your family safely, weirdly. And we went all over the place. We went down and looked at a port that the Chinese may be involved in down near the Nicaraguan side. If you can look on the map, see where I'm talking about.
Sure.
There was nothing going on there, but they're keeping it in good condition. And we went to that library. I like the way that they're pushing the Bitcoin, but what is the Bitcoin? I don't know. I know the Bitcoin people that are watching this will go crazy. It's the new gold or whatever. It's like, whatever, man. I use Bitcoin all the time because my banks give me such a hard time. But do I really think it's gold? I think you're a fool if you think Bitcoin is gold. But it's obviously an incredible investment. It's obviously been an incredible investment, and it's obviously incredibly useful. Those things are obvious. Bitcoin, or let's say crypto, but let's go to Bitcoin. Incredibly useful. It's been an incredible investment for people, and it obviously has an incredible future. But what is it really? Is it some sort of trap? I do not know. I simply do not know. I know that my nose twitches when I think about it. I use it often, again, because the fiat is an obvious trap. But bottom line is, I like how El Salvador is using Bitcoin. Let's go down to Venezuela. There are Westerners now moving to Venezuela, Margarita Island. One of the reasons why is Venezuela is actually pushing Bitcoin, I'm told. And I've been talking with these people quite a lot, having dinner with them down here in Buenos Aires and that sort of thing. And they're telling me all about, but also they started to have power outages on Margarita Island recently. But in any case, there's a lot of things going on in the world. There's a lot of strange energies, Russian airplanes constantly landing in Venezuela, that sort of thing. The US dollar is huge in Venezuela. You can swap Bitcoin for, huge stacks full of US dollars there. You just can't make up this stuff. So it's a complex world. What do I think about El Salvador? I would not build a long-term future there. I mean, I think that's a mistake because I'm watching what China's doing. I'm watching China put their footprint. IOM is there. IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is the main engine of the invasion. If you go to the Canadian embassy in San Salvador, which we did earlier this year, the IOM office is right next door to them. If you go to their office up in Honduras, I think it was, this year we went to Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, Panama a few times, and a few others. But we're always going to the IOM offices. Like we went to this one last Monday, about 9 days ago, and here in Buenos Aires. But the El Salvadorian IOM is with the Canadian embassy, and over in, I think it was Honduras, they're in the same building. It was Guatemala or Honduras. They're in the same building. If you go to Belize, which doesn't have many aliens going through at this time, there's the biggest IOM office I've seen yet. Well, outside of their headquarters in Geneva, but I haven't been to that one. Masako has. But the IOM office in Belize is substantial. And the IOM, they only need a small office. They only need an office the size of half a floor in a condo. You know what I mean? The small footprint, they're like the Bank of International Settlements. The small footprint goes a long way, right? And so what I'm getting to is the IOM is right there, thick with the Canadian embassy there in El Salvador. Why? And keep in mind, the IOM is your main problem with the invasions in Canada. Now, that said, the Chinese do their own invasion. They have their own ecosystem. Like the IOM office manager here in, I suppose he was the office manager. He's the guy that came out and talked with us. He looked like he was in charge, but he didn't say his actual job. But here in Buenos Aires, came out and talked with us last Monday when we walked in asking for a job. And he said that I asked him who's the number one groups that are coming to Argentina. He said Venezuelans. And after that, it's Bolivians and Paraguayans, also a lot of people from Africa, like Senegal. And I asked about Chinese. He said there's a lot of Chinese that come to Argentina, but IOM doesn't help them much because the Chinese government helps them, right? So even when you look in the Darien Gap, even though the Chinese are coming through the same ecosystem, within the pipeline. They're actually a pipeline within the pipeline, right? So many of the Chinese people often ask, well, why do the Chinese or anybody go through the Darien Gap when they can just go these other routes? I think it's multiple reasons. One is they do come through the other routes. They do come on student visas. They do come on work visas. They do come through Canada. They do go on vacations in Mexico to all over the place, Mexico City, and they go to many. Actually, we found many of their package deals. They have package vacation deals, and then from there they go to Texas or Arizona or whatever. So they come in all these different ways, and so it's not they just come through. They come through Bahamas, up on the Florida beaches. They come all these different ways, the Chinese and others, right? So they do come these other ways. But I think one of the reasons that the Darien route is they concentrate on that route is because that eventually is going to be used as an invasion route. I think that the Colombians are going to end up making a claim on Panama. I've never seen anybody say this but me, actually, and I've been saying it for a long time. I think the Colombians eventually will make a claim on Panama and say Panama is ours. They'll be sponsored. I think I'm just guessing. I think the Colombians will be sponsored by the Chinese, and they will start salami slicing or just take Panama, because that Panama Canal is absolutely vital to the United States, both economically and for our military, right? And so Panama is a giant pork chop. It's got they're building a road now down to Colombia. People tell me all the time it's impossible. They can't build the road to Colombia, which is utter bullshit. They built the Panama Canal, right, which is a lot more difficult than building a road and a railroad down to Colombia, right? It's child's play to build that. Anybody that's driven on through Louisiana knows what that road can look like. We can build roads through swamps. It's not a problem, right? Go up to Norway and go across some of those bridges. Go to Netherlands and look at those huge dike systems, right? I mean, the road down to Panama to Colombia is child's play for serious people with serious money. And these are serious people with serious money, right? And there's a serious reason to do it. I think Colombia will end up making a claim on Panama. They'll end up being a war. I'm just guessing. I don't know this, obviously. It just smells like it. You'll end up with Panama will end up in Chinese hands, is my guess. And now people say that's impossible. The United States will defend it. Bullshit. The United States isn't defending Canada. They're defending Israel. They're not defending Ireland. They're defending Israel. They're not defending anybody but Israel. They're not defending our own border. They're defending Israel, right? So the bottom line is the Monroe Doctrine is gone. People keep talking about the Monroe Doctrine as if it's still there, right? It does not exist.
And what is the doctrine? What does it say?
That we will not allow foreign forces or foreign interest into this region of South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and all this area here that can be used to basically cut us off, right? Or to attack us, right? It's a very smart doctrine that, wise men with testosterone thought up a long time ago, and we've been enforcing it until now. The Monroe Doctrine is gone. China has a port in the Bahamas. Let me repeat, they're doing the same in Antigua, right? They're doing the same in El Salvador. They're doing the same. They haven't done it yet with Guatemala or with Belize because Guatemala and Belize still have good relationship with Taiwan. Taiwan is desperate to keep those relations with Guatemala and Belize, which are the two countries that are on the southern border of Mexico. Because once Taiwan has no international relations with any foreign countries, like the United States has basically written Taiwan off. Despite what we say, the reality of it is we've written Taiwan off. That's the reality. Let's get past all the bullshit and get down to the reality part. We've written it off, right? And so I think that they're going to end up taking Belize. Why does IOM have a huge office? And IOM works closely with China. Why does IOM have a huge office in Belize, right? And there's no serious float. Right now, the Taiwanese government is helping Belize build roads. That's great. And the Belizeans and the Taiwanese get along very well. The very close relationship. That's great. And there's people that think that can't be changed. Those would be the people that know nothing about information war. Those would be the people that in 2019 would say 1 billion people would never take the death jab. Well, they would be wrong, right? In fact, they're probably the people that took it, right? And you can take beliefs. Information war is the highest form of warfare. The Chinese are extremely good at it. They've been whittling away. Most people watching this probably believe that Taiwan is a breakaway province of China. Most people probably think that the people that think they know something about Taiwan probably think that Taiwan is a breakaway province of China. But let me ask you, when was Taiwan part of China? Never, never, not one day, ever, right? But you can talk with CIA analysts and everybody else, and they'll say, well, you've got that wrong. And I'm like, okay, Mr. CIA analyst, I'm waiting for you to send me the documents that show where Taiwan was ever part of China. It's just information war. That's it. Information war is amazingly effective. Taiwan, or let's say Formosa, was never part of China. It just never happened. But the world believes it, so it's true in a sense, right? It's true insofar as the actual mechanisms of war are concerned. It is true insofar as the ability to wage war and isolate Taiwan and then take it. China is coming for Taiwan the same way that they're coming for us, like an anaconda. They're coming the same way they're coming for Canada, to swallow you, not to attack you, but to become you, right? And the Chinese will say that. We're coming to become you, right? They're going to grow like kudzu. Now you have people with ties to the Chinese Communist Party in the Canadian government. They don't have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. They are in the Chinese Communist Party. You have members of the Chinese government in your government who were elected in your government. We do too. I mean, straight up. I mean, let's just call it what it is.
So how do you, have you, in your travels, you study this for pretty much your entire lifetime, Michael?
Right.
What they're doing, and I probably get this a bit wrong because you're on the front line, so you see it and you're like, no, it's pretty blatantly obvious. But to just a regular, everyday person walking around, I think the worst thing they could do is drop tanks in Canada, because it would signal, holy crap, this is real, and everybody would wake up to it. So what they do is the anaconda thing, as you're pointing out. They just slowly, they got a police station. They got a police station? Why do they got a police station? Oh, and then it kind of fades away and people forget about it. They got 11 MPs. 11 MPs? What? Oh, yeah, and they just kind of fades away. And it's this anaconda thing you're talking about. How do you slap somebody out of this sleepwalk that we seem to be in as we're just, it's the frog in boiling water? How do you get people to wise up to it? You've been taking people to the Darien Gap now over the past how many years? What has worked?
Yeah. Well, one way is, I know this is unpopular, but I do spend most of my time overseas. Most of my life has been outside of the United States. This is actually my 99th country that I've actually been to, like truly been to, right? And so I spend years at a time. Sometimes I'll go for like a month and not see another white person, except maybe in the news. Right? That's it, right? So I'm quite familiar with what drugged up people look like and non-drugged up people look like. When I go back to the United States, I see a lot of people on drugs. I don't know what kind of drugs they're on. I don't know if it's something that they've got prescription, or if it's alcohol, or if it's cannabis of unknown origin. But they're clearly not firing. They're clearly not running on high testosterone. They're clearly not running on all cylinders. They're like their engine is sputtering, right? And they're just asleep. Soma, right? It's the soma, right? I mean, first, stop watching fools like Joe Rogan, who smoked dope with Elon Musk, two of the most influential men in the world, smoking dope in front of millions of young people. What was that? And Elon Musk pushed the death jab. He pushed it. People are like, Elon didn't do that. Bullshit. He did it. I've said this over and over and over. He did it publicly. It's not hidden. Elon Musk was like, the science is unequivocal. He stood behind it. He smoked dope with Joe Rogan. These are people that are pushing our people into sleepwalking, right? You had President Trump pushing Amendment 3 for Florida. Amendment 3 is the amendment that will allow people, these COVID places, instantly the dopers will instantly go, well, people have a right to put what's in their bodies. I get it. I agree, actually. And I totally agree. I also realized what's really going on. First of all, this isn't the dope of the 60s, right? I mean, you should see Thailand now. I've spent years in Thailand. I used to have an office in Chiang Mai. I was just over there with Doug Casey, the famous commodities trader.
Yeah, international man. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I'll probably see him tonight. He and I do a weekly podcast together. I just spent a week with him in his apartment here in Buenos Aires. And so I know Doug, right? Doug and I were together in Thailand about a month or so ago, and there are now 9,400 licensed outlets, we were told by an attorney in Thailand, 9,400 outlets for cannabis. I'd never seen that in Thailand before. I'm very familiar with Thailand. And now we see dope stores everywhere, right? Now, yeah, and they're everywhere you look. I mean, all around you. It's like the matrix of dope. Now, again, people are like, yeah, but people have a right and da-da-da-da-da. Like,
and you're going, morons, think about this. I agree with you,
So
but look at what it's doing to the population.
Everybody watching this has had at least one family member who is an alcoholic or a dope addict or a gambling addiction, right? And everybody watching this either has been that person or has had one of those people in their families or knows somebody like that. If you have one serious alcoholic or drug addict or somebody with a serious gambling addiction in your family under your roof, that's like getting a missile right through into your household. That can wipe out your family. That can wipe out your family's future. That can end you from the big farmhouse to the small apartment in the city, right? And now you don't have to get everybody doped up. It does the critical, whether it's prescription drugs or whatever. Why do I see so many people, so many of my veteran friends, they went off to a war or they didn't go to a war. They go to the VA and the VA says, oh, you got PTSD, take these pills. I'm like, you know what? I've known you for years. You didn't start acting crazy until you started taking those damn drugs. Stop taking whatever they were. Why do you need that crap? Did our grandfathers need that crap? They didn't need it. Guess what? I did as much combat as anybody else, and I don't take any drugs. I don't drink alcohol. I don't take any prescriptions, nothing. If I get wounded and I get an infection, of course I'm going to take drugs. I'm going to take whatever it takes to stop the infection. But I don't take anything for my moods except I like coffee, right? That's it. And I like tea. That's it. And so you don't need it. I did a tremendous amount of combat, and I don't have PTSD. I would just go walk up in the Himalayas, go walk to Mount Everest, stuff like that, and get in the sunshine. If you're listening to sad music, throw that shit out. Stop listening to it, right? Seriously. People are like, oh, I'm depressed. I'm like, let me see what music you're listening to. Okay, no more Elton John. No more. Just get rid of this shit.
No more Taylor Swift.
Yeah, no more of this crap. No more of this. That thing.
If you look, if you here, I got one more question for you, because I'm like, okay, if you look here, because this has been really fascinating. You've given me. I'm gonna have to go back. I'm gonna have to listen to this again, and I'm gonna reach back out to you. And we're gonna redo this all over again, because I'm gonna have about 1,000 questions come from my audience. If you look into the next year, right? Because some of the things you're talking about, I'm like, holy crap, okay, and then I go back to even Doug Casey. Because Doug's been on the show before, right? Some of these things take 40 years, as you pointed out. Some of them are going to take the next 3 months. When you look at the next 3 months, do you see big things coming? You got Donald Trump, love or hate the guy, the next president of the United States, talking about ending the wars and different things like that. What do you see in the near future?
Timing is where I can get things wildly wrong.
Sure.
Because timing is that's voodoo. On some timings it can be easier to predict than others, but what will happen next? Now, will Trump actually move? Let's just talk about the Darien Gap, because that's a finite place and it's easy for me to audit that, right? Because I've got it all stitched up. You can't basically you can't do anything in the Darien Gap without me figuring it out very quickly, right? And so Darien Gap, if he wants to close the Darien Gap, he can close it in a week or two. It's very simple, because Now people will say, no, you can't do that. Don't you understand? Panama is a different country. Yeah, trust me, Rambo. I get it, right? I get that all the time. I get it. But I also know that it was my team, Operation Burning Edge, with Masako Ganaha and Ann Vandersteel and some other incredible teammates who helped set the conditions for the current president of Panama to run on a platform of closing the Darien Gap. That was us. Yeah, we get it. Not only do we get it, we're deeply involved in it, right? We set those conditions, right? We know that the Panamanian government is ready to close the Darien Gap. We know that they can close it because they did it during COVID, right? Now, if the U.S. government wants to close the Darien Gap, it will be closed. The U.S. government is the one keeping it up, open. Now, anybody who says we need to do tariffs against Panama to close it is either part of the problem or has no idea what's going on. They just don't know. Even if they've been there, if they've been to Panama and they're like, we need to put tariffs on Panama to close the Darien Gap, bullshit. You're not even at the table. The adult table knows that Panama wants to close the Darien Gap. Tariffs will just alienate Panama and push them further towards China, right? Panama still has, weirdly, some affection to the United States, and they will work with us. They are actually concerned about China, or China as they call it. They're very concerned about China. They're very concerned. They're not as concerned as much about the United States. They want us to help them keep that canal. That was our canal, by the way. If you say that in Panama, it drives them nuts, but we did build it. And we're the ones who helped Panama split off from Colombia. Like, Panama was not a country until we sponsored that breakaway. And that is the basis that I think Colombia will use to say Panama is ours, because the United States helped it split off so they could build the Panama Canal, which we did. We did it openly, right? And we used our Navy to block the Colombians way back when. The canal opened in 1914, right? And so the bottom line is, it's a different world. China is moving all over the place, whether it's Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, El Salvador, of course, all these places. In Honduras, you wouldn't believe it. And I've been to every country from Canada all the way down to Colombia. Right now I'm in Argentina. I haven't been to all the countries in between there, but I've been watching these things for years. And so I have some basis for the things I'm saying. And it's not from reading Financial Times. It's from going out and being with peoples in these governments, being with farmers in these different countries, and that sort of thing.
I really appreciate you giving me some time today. This is I got to give a shout out to retired Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Murray for hooking this up. He was the man
Colonel Murray
that put us in touch. And I hope at some point you'll come back on again. But I do appreciate you hopping on, Michael, and doing this. And I'll be paying attention to what comes next on your side of things.
Thank you, Shaun.